Look at this report. The City Archive of Wichita, Kansas, spring 1925. Now, look here, at this empty space. 3 months. The medical department's files for May, June, and July are simply gone, vanished. The official story is a bureaucratic error during a hospital transfer. But what if it's not an error? What if it's a grave? A grave for an autopsy report that was never meant to be seen. And to bury that report, someone had to bury a legend about the 2 doctors who wrote it. Wichita, 1925. A city on the rise. Oil, money, a growing population. But beneath that gleaming surface lies a problem. For 7 counties, there are only 2 certified pathologists, 2 men capable of distinguishing an accident from a murder, 2 men whose signatures determine whether a case is closed or an investigation begins. And according to local legend, these 2 men disappear without a trace. But our investigation showed that there is not a single mention of their disappearance in the official records. Not one. And that, Evelyn, is even more terrifying than the legend itself. It means the myth is smoke, and our job is to find out what's burning behind it.
Or to understand that where there's smoke, there's fire, Arthur. But the fire isn't always what you're looking for. A shortage of specialists was a real problem nationwide. Newspapers of the era are filled with stories of delayed investigations because the only expert for hundreds of miles was away, an expert's temporary disappearance, as they wrote. Add to that the real, high-profile story of a missing surgeon in nearby Kansas City that same year, and you have a ready-made recipe for a myth. People are tired of boring, prosaic deaths. They need a mystery, even if they have to invent it.
And that's the whole point, Evelyn. The official report is boring and predictable. It puts you to sleep. It says, it was a myth, nothing to see here. But if you dig deeper, beneath the layer of bureaucracy, you'll always find a signal that forces you to wake up. A signal that proves some stories aren't just made up, they are crafted with a specific purpose. And our channel, Fringe Signal, exists to catch those signals. We don't tell scary stories, we expose lies.
Or we expose the mechanism of self-deception. The value of our archive isn't in confirming a conspiracy theory, Arthur. It's in providing all the facts, both rational and anomalous, and allowing the viewer to draw their own conclusion. We don't offer belief, we offer an intellectual challenge. The ability to distinguish a real signal from background noise is the true power in the modern world, and today's case is the perfect training ground for it.
All right, let's get to the facts. The legend says 2 pathologists vanished. The documents say, no, they didn't. But those same documents say there were only 2 of them for a massive area. One of them was Dr. Thor Yeager, a true pioneer, founder of the department at Wesley Hospital. These 2 men are the bottleneck of the entire justice system. Remove them or their reports, and you can hide anything. And now for the key fact. May, July 1925. There's a hole in the city archive. A portion of the medical department's files is missing from that exact period.
And there's a perfectly rational explanation for that, confirmed by documents. It was in the summer of 1925 that the Wichita City Hospital was sold to the Sisters of St. Joseph, a monastic order. It was a huge transaction, a transfer of property, a bureaucratic nightmare. Losing a part of the archive in that chaos isn't a sign of a conspiracy, it's a sign of a common bureaucratic mess.
A mess or an opportunity? An opportunity that someone exploited. Imagine, during this window of chaos, a very important person dies. A politician, an oil tycoon, the wife of an influential figure, dies under circumstances that cannot be made public. The body is sent for autopsy to one of our two experts. He does his job, writes a report that could destroy someone's reputation, career, life. And that report needs to be buried.
And for that, you don't need to kill a doctor, Arthur. You just need to bribe a clerk in the archive, or the doctor himself. Corruption is a far more likely explanation than the kidnapping and murder of two key medical specialists whose disappearance would have caused a massive scandal, which, as we know, never happened.
And what if they refused the bribe? What if they were principled? Then you don't bribe them, you discredit them, you silence them. And that's where a third party gets involved. Official interference. Someone powerful enough to apply pressure. Not directly, no, too crude. They act more subtly. They create problems. Anonymous complaints about the doctor's work start to appear. The tax service suddenly launches an audit. Hints about their incompetence show up in the press. Their work is paralyzed. They're under pressure.
That's just your speculation, Arthur. There are no mentions in the newspapers of that time of any pressure on Dr. Yeager or his colleague. On the contrary, an article was published in November 1925 about the shortage of forensic experts, where their work was praised.
Exactly. The article comes out in November when it's all over, when the report in question is already lost in the archival chaos. It reminds me of a case from my past. We called it the glass patient. Strange things started happening at a hydroelectric power plant in Washington state. Workers complained of lost time. Watches would be off by several hours at the end of a shift. The official commission blamed it all on magnetic fields from the generators. But we dug deeper. In a utility room, we found an object, not of this earth. It did nothing but one thing. It locally distorted time. But the interesting part came later. We were approached by people in suits, not from our division. They didn't threaten us. They turned the truth into an administrative hell, buried it under tons of paperwork until everyone just got tired of looking. That's their signature. It doesn't change. The legend of the vanished doctors isn't a story about murder. It's the perfect smokescreen created in hindsight. A year later, when someone asks, "Where's the autopsy report for that Mr. X?" they'll be told, "Oh, you don't know? It was a mess that year. Even the pathologists were disappearing." And the question is dismissed.
All right, Arthur. Your theory is elegant, I'll admit, but it rests on one assumption, that there was some body X that started this whole chain of events, and we have no proof of that. It's pure speculation. All we have is a set of coincidences, a personnel shortage, the sale of a hospital, lost archives. Mix them together, and you get a myth. That's enough. Why introduce another entity, a crime?
Because there's something else. Something I haven't mentioned. I made a request to the Wichita Police Archive regarding all deaths registered as accidents or suicides from January to April 1925. That is, before the archives were lost. And you know what? Access to those files is restricted.
What? But why? These are historical documents.
The official reason is preservation of fragile documents. But my source in the archive whispered to me that the restriction was put in place very recently, last year, after a certain private researcher started getting too interested in one specific suicide case from April 1925. And that researcher has stopped all communication. This is no longer a coincidence, Evelyn. This is a pattern. Someone, even now, 100 years later, is guarding this secret. They didn't just bury a report. They put a headstone on the grave, and they're still chasing people away from it. And that proves that whatever lies beneath that headstone is far more real than a city myth. So, what are we left with? A local legend that, at first glance, turned out to be a dud. But beneath it lie real facts. A critical shortage of key specialists, chaos in the archives, and suddenly classified century-old case files. The legend of the vanished doctors wasn't meant to scare, it was meant to soothe, to create a simple, albeit grim, explanation for the absence of answers, so that we would stare at the mystical fog and not notice the real crime it conceals.
Or we're seeing what we want to see. Perhaps restricting access to the archives really is about preservation, and the missing researcher is just another urban legend. But I have to admit, the degree of coincidence in this case is beyond statistical noise. But the most terrifying part isn't even that, Arthur. The most terrifying part is that the fundamental problem that allowed this to happen in 1925, the critical shortage of forensic pathologists, is, according to reports, even worse today. That means these gaps and lost reports could be happening right now. This case isn't just a cold case, it's a systemic vulnerability, and it never went away.
The signal has faded, but the echo remains. We have presented you with all the known facts from this case, but it's possible that even we have missed the most important pieces of the mosaic.
Or found extra ones. What do you think? Which version seems more real to you? A conspiracy to cover up a crime, or a chain of tragic coincidences that gave birth to a myth? Your theories are the most valuable part of our archive. Leave them below.
If you are ready to keep listening, subscribe. End of transmission.